I developed a ranking system to estimate who will win future FIFA World Cups. Keep watching if you want to see it, but there's a lot leading up to it, so let's start from the beginning. The FIFA World Cup is the biggest sporting event on Earth, and so far it's been won by just 8 countries. But this is bound to change in the future, as other countries eventually catch up. Who will be the first World Cup winner from Africa, Asia, and North America, if any? Who will be the next first-time champion from Europe? The late Brain for Breakfast made a great video that essentially lays out how to win the World Cup, based on some of the best football literature out there. This video is gonna build upon that, and determine what new first-time winners of the World Cup we may see in the future. The following factors are found to correlate with a country's World Cup success: experience, being connected and innovative, population, and wealth. These factors will be weighed together to gauge which countries may win their first World Cups this century. I'm only gonna include non-World Cup winners, since that's the main focus of the video. But I'll also use a couple of World Cup winning teams as examples to further illustrate the ranking and what it means. Also, I'll only include countries that have participated at least one World Cup, for the sake of my sanity, and because it's not so interesting to examine countless small island nations when you know they're gonna have an extremely low ranking regardless. India have never played at a World Cup, but I'm still gonna use them as a bonus example, because it's such a huge country, and I'm curious to see how they rank. And I of course have to think of my extremely wide and global audience. Anyways, let's move on to quantifying the variables. I wonder how many times that sentence has been said before. The first variable is pretty straightforward. We simply rank countries according to when their football association was founded. The earlier it was created, the more points the country gets. Still with me? Good, because things are only getting more complicated from here on out. The second variable isn't as simple. How do you quantify how connected and innovative a country is when it comes to football? After experimenting with some ranking methods, I ultimately landed on these: a country's yearly total exports per capita, and a country's ranking on the 2023 Global Innovation Index. A country being ranked highly according to these factors doesn't necessarily mean it's connected and innovative in football, but I did find a pretty solid correlation. Also, I couldn't really find better options. The third variable is thankfully extremely easy to quantify. Just rank countries based on their population. Brilliant. Which brings me to this video's sponsor, Brilliant.com. Nah, not yet. Just kidding. Alright, a fourth variable. Wealth. Just look at a country's GDP per capita. Great. Simple enough. I also added a bonus variable to ensure countries with a lack of football success aren't overrated by the rankings. World Cup performances throughout the 21st century, though I did include the 1998 World Cup, as it's also part of the 32-team era. Alright, here are the final rankings. Wait a minute, we have to decide how to weigh the different variables first. Didn't you know that? Otherwise, China will be absurdly overrated due to their high population, and Ireland's godlike GDP per capita will make them more overrated than the 1990 World Cup. To determine how the different variables should be weighed, I counted the number of total World Cup appearances in the top 20 in each ranking category. Obviously, what else would you do? That way we know which variable is more correlated with World Cup success, and by extension how important it is. Here are the variables ranked on importance. Did you catch that? Good. In my algorithm, a team's number of points in each respective ranking category will be divided by a number based on how important that ranking category is. Extremely straightforward, I know. For simplicity's sake, let's say there's an example country with 10 points in each category, which is completely awful by the way, but that's beside the point. This is how this country's points would be calculated. The most important variable would be divided by 1, the second most important would be divided by 2, the third most important would be divided by 3, etc, etc. The more important a category is, the more points it yields. That's what it boils down to. To determine example countries' total points and overall ranking, the points are added together. So 1.67 plus 2 plus 2.5 plus 3.33 plus 5 plus 10 equals 24.5. Still with me? This would place it dead last on the overall rankings. Speaking of which, I think it's finally time to show the final product. For the sake of my sanity and to stop this video from being hours long, I've decided to limit the ranking to the top 20. But if you have questions regarding a country outside that limit, or about anything else for that matter, don't be afraid to ask in the comments. Also, I should add that Scotland missed out on the top 20 by the skin of their teeth, in typical Scottish fashion. Anyways, here are the rankings, and yes, I know you see some controversial placements, but it will all be explained in due time. This is how I think the rankings should be interpreted. Considering a country's football history, experience, connectivity, innovation, population, and wealth, which nations have the highest probability of winning their first FIFA World Cup before the year 2100, provided they fulfill their potential? Try saying that fast 5 times if you can. Given this definition, it might seem absurd that Denmark and Switzerland are ranked higher than the United States. But having a population of less than 4 million didn't stop Croatia from reaching consecutive World Cup semifinals and one final recently, nor has it prevented Uruguay from winning 2 titles. To be fair, that was many decades ago, but the impact of having a big population should still not be overestimated. That said, I think Switzerland are slightly overranked here. They shouldn't be above Belgium, and you can definitely argue that the US should be ranked higher than Denmark, but they're split by less than a single point, so the difference is basically non-existent. However, I will also add that Denmark and Switzerland are wealthy nations with rich footballing traditions. If they spend their money accordingly, they may very well become new Belgiums, Portugals, and Netherlands, so to speak. It's easy to forget that the Netherlands were mediocre before emerging as a power in the early 1970s. Similarly, Belgium and Portugal generally weren't great before the 21st century, despite their occasional golden generation. I think Sweden can reach that level too, even though we completely suck right now, don't get me wrong. And that if of spending the money accordingly is massive, so unfortunately I'm not too optimistic. The Netherlands are ranked number 1, which I think makes a lot of sense. They're an experienced and wealthy historical powerhouse, despite being in a bit of a slump now, not to mention that they've played in 3 World Cup finals. Hopefully they'll win one eventually. It also makes sense that Belgium are ranked so highly, even though they should probably be above the Swiss, but I already mentioned that. Next we have Japan and South Korea. Japan's high rank makes perfect sense. They're clearly the best team in Asia and have emerged as a talent factory. Hell, they even beat Germany and Spain at the last World Cup. Pair this with their quite solid wealth and high population, and you have a team with respectable odds to win a World Cup this century. South Korea's rank is also great, but they had already played at 4 World Cups before fellow Asians Japan debuted in 1998, later than most people realize. However, South Korea can be excused by Japan's higher GDP per capita and more than twice as big population. Now on to the elephants in the room. Portugal and Croatia. What the hell are they doing down there? The way to interpret their seemingly low ranks is that they overperform their conditions. They are better than they quote-unquote should be, based on the factors that generally correlate with a country's World Cup success. That's why they are ranked so low, despite being currently stronger than most teams above them. It also goes to show that the advantages gained based on these factors are only on average. There will always be outliers in both directions. Croatia and Portugal are positive examples. On the contrary, Sweden, as a completely random example, proved that you can be terrible despite having ideal conditions to be good, minus the weather. I don't think you can argue too much about Mexico's placement. They've been consistently solid at the World Cup for decades, reaching 1 billion consecutive last of 16 matches before just barely missing out now in Qatar. Their rank is impressive given their relatively low GDP per capita and the score on the Innovation Index. Australia's rank makes sense too, despite being late World Cup bloomers. They rank highly on all variables except experience, but that's bound to improve in the future. Chile's placement is also reasonable. Norway and Ireland haven't played at World Cups in well over 2 decades, but still break the top 20 due to scoring highly in other variables. Expect to see them at the World Cup within the coming decades. The ranks of Poland, Turkey, Austria and Colombia all make sense. I don't think they're too controversial. However, it might seem odd that Russia manages to reach the top 20, despite their war with Ukraine. As the war progresses, Russia will probably decline, but for now they narrowly squeeze into the top 20. Now onto the bonus examples I promised ages ago. Brazil would have the same number of points as Croatia, which might seem crazy low. However, they're another example of a team who overperforms their conditions. That said, Brazil have been in a slump for a couple of decades now. They've never experienced a World Cup drought this long before, so I don't think the rank is entirely misleading. Still though, they should be ranked a bit higher. England would reach the top spot with 159.1 points, which I think makes sense, so it's good to see that my rankings aren't complete trash. India would get 55.3 points, which is not enough to break the top 50, let alone top 20. But they're still much better than North Korea, and they're 25.2 points, which is comically low, by the way. I cannot overemphasize how bad that is. Here are some miscellaneous facts about the top 20. 13 of the teams are European if you include Turkey, since they're UEFA members, and the best European side are the Netherlands. 2 teams are North American, with the United States being the best. 2 are South American as well, with Chile being the best. 2 to 3 teams are Asian, depending on what you want to label Australia. They could be considered an entirely different continent, but they do belong to the Asian Football Confederation. And needless to say, Japan are the best in Asia. Before ending the video, there are some things I'd like to add. These rankings are not perfect, but are the best I could come up with after a lot of trial and error. If you think you have a better system, I'd love to see it. Bigger countries are treated a bit unfairly here, as I count GDP and exports per capita. However, if I didn't, the inverse would be true, so I think this is the lesser of the evils. Also, special thanks to the late Brain for Breakfast and the authors of Soccernomics, Simon Cooper and Stefan Szymanski. Remember to like, comment and subscribe.